Patty Hearst was never supposed to be the face of rebellion. Born into the Hearst family fortune, she had everything: mansions, private schools, generational power. Her grandfather was William Randolph Hearst, the newspaper titan who practically invented yellow journalism. She wasn't just rich, she was American royalty. In 1974, Patty was living in a Berkeley apartment, studying art at UC, engaged to a drama teacher, and living a quiet, privileged life. But all of that ended the night a radical group with barely a dozen members kicked in her door, beat her fiancé, and shoved her into the trunk of a car. And just like that, one of the wildest and most bizarre stories in American history began, with the kidnapping of a sheltered 19-year-old girl. The group that took her called themselves the Symbionese Liberation Army, or SLA. They weren't your average protest group. They were a far-left revolutionary cell, part militant, part cult, all chaos. They believed in overthrowing capitalism, dismantling systemic racism, and starting a people's revolution by any means necessary. But in reality, they were a ragtag crew of mostly middle-class radicals and former prisoners, led by a man calling himself General Field Marshal Cinque. They didn't have political influence, real funding, or public support. What they had was one hell of a plan: snatch someone famous, someone loaded, and demand national attention. Patty wasn't just a hostage, she was their opening act. After the abduction, the SLA issued a tape to the media demanding the Hearst family donate millions of dollars worth of food to poor Californians. It was a chaotic stunt that resulted in food riots, empty shelves, and fights in the street. But even after all that, Patty wasn't released. Instead, she dropped a bombshell. She was joining them. The next time the public heard her voice, she was calling her parents Pig Hearsts and announcing her new name, Tanya, after a Cuban revolutionary. To most Americans, it felt impossible. How could the heiress become a guerrilla? Was she brainwashed? Acting? Lying? Nobody knew, and that mystery made her even more magnetic. The headlines couldn't get enough of her transformation, and the SLA knew it. They didn't just take Patty, they turned her into a weapon. Then came the bank robbery. 2 months after she vanished, security footage showed Patty standing inside a bank in San Francisco, gripping an M1 carbine like she'd been born to carry it. She shouted at customers to hit the ground and held her stance like a trained militant. The media exploded. This wasn't a hostage. This was a gun-wielding revolutionary, and now officially a fugitive. From that moment on, she was no longer kidnapped newspaper heiress. She was America's most wanted woman. The FBI launched a full manhunt, and public opinion started to split in two. Some believed she was a victim, others were convinced she was a willing terrorist. And the SLA? They kept moving, hiding in safe houses, robbing more banks, and spreading chaos wherever they could. The story hit LA like a thunderclap on May 17, 1974. In Compton, the SLA was holed up in a tiny yellow house. What happened next was one of the most intense moments in TV history. LAPD SWAT rolled up, surrounded the home, and launched a full-scale assault. News crews captured everything live as gunfire erupted. Tear gas filled the air, and the house burst into flames. Inside, 6 SLA members burned alive, including one of the group's most vocal leaders, Angela Atwood. Millions watched it all unfold on their TVs. It was the first ever live broadcast of a shootout between police and a domestic terrorist group. But Patty wasn't there. She'd already escaped with Bill and Emily Harris, the 2 SLA members who had originally snatched her from Berkeley. The chase was far from over. For over a year, Patty and the Harrises vanished into America's underground. She dyed her hair, moved from city to city, and lived as a fugitive. She was spotted in a Sacramento coffee shop, then seen weeks later in New York. Her mugshot was plastered across the country, but every time the authorities closed in, she slipped away. Finally, in September 1975, 19 months after the kidnapping, the FBI cornered her in a San Francisco apartment. She was arrested without incident, and what followed was one of the most watched trials in U.S. history. Her lawyer, the famous F. Lee Bailey, argued she'd been brainwashed, isolated, and manipulated. Patty testified that she'd been kept in a closet for weeks, blindfolded and terrorized until she broke. She claimed she was never a revolutionary, just a traumatized girl doing whatever it took to survive. The prosecution wasn't having it. They painted her as a traitor, a rich girl who fell in love with radicalism and enjoyed playing outlaw. They pointed to her voice on the tapes, her gun in the robbery, and her refusal to leave when the SLA gave her chances. The jury didn't buy her story. She was convicted of bank robbery and sentenced to 7 years in prison. But public pressure never stopped mounting. Some believed she was a villain. Others saw her as a victim of Stockholm syndrome, a psychological phenomenon where hostages begin to sympathize with their captors. After just 22 months behind bars, President Jimmy Carter commuted her sentence. Years later, President Bill Clinton granted her a full pardon. In the end, Patty walked free, but her legacy was carved in concrete. Her story lives at the intersection of wealth, trauma, politics, and power. She forced the country to ask, what happens when privilege crashes into ideology? Was she a lost soul, radicalized against her will? Or did she willingly step into a revolution she didn't fully understand? Nobody has ever been able to agree on the answer, and maybe that's why the Patty Hearst story still fascinates people. She wasn't just a headline. She was a human contradiction, a person who went from velvet couches and family portraits to shootouts, safe houses, and televised manhunts. And somehow, she survived all of it. Even today, her name sparks debates. She's made peace with her past in some ways, wrote a memoir, lived out of the spotlight, and even competed in dog shows. But no matter how quiet her life is now, the name Patty Hearst will always echo with gunfire, politics, and revolution. And in the back rooms of LA and San Francisco, where the SLA once hid and plotted, her shadow still lingers.